Boom. We're recording. It's happening.
Whoa, this is crazy. Very nice.
Dude.
All right. Well, here we are. I'm here with Ryan Francis from Educate for Life podcast, and near and dear friend of mine and colleague, cohort. I like talking to you, Ryan, because you're a thinker, and I love talking to people that like to expand their consciousness and just have a free floating association with allowing thoughts to come in and exploring them. The things that I'm interested in, you have some similar interests as well. And for me, it's health, all things health, mental health, physical health, and how those things coexist together, and just helping people with information about how to access higher levels of help and health, not help.
Yes.
And,
Both are required.
um, and just, actualizing your full potentiality is basically, the things that I'm very interested in. So the things that I've been curious about recently, we've talked a lot, and I'm very much interested in, the different laws of nature. Like law of attraction is something that I deeply believe in, and I use it, pretty much daily. But it goes so much more beyond that.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm very interested in recently is, and we mentioned it just before we started recording today, was about how to get quickly and consistently and effectively into a flow state. And, a lot of times when you say the word flow state, people may or may not have heard about that. But basically, it's just getting into a place where you're not constrained by, your inner critic, self-consciousness, and you can just be more expansive with your thoughts and solutions, just in a higher realm. What exactly do you think? Give me your ideas about flow state and what that means to you.
Yeah, it's actually really funny because I changed my definition of flow state based on the 30 seconds of that we were chatting about it right before we started recording.
Cool.
Because originally I thought of flow state as, and it's often, or rather, I have typically heard of it in association with athletes,
Yeah.
where they're in the zone.
Mhm.
And for thinkers, creators, flow state being related, where it's this place where you settle in, where the things that are typically uncomfortable are comfortable, things come easily, and it is just as it sounds, flow. So if you think of flowing water, there aren't obstructions to the water flowing. So if you're running, your muscles feel like they like running. There's this sense where suddenly like your body is just moving and you're not having to think about how you move. You're having to think about technique. Or as a dancer, when I was performing on stage, the moment when I'd forget the choreography, but not because I was no longer doing it, but because I no longer had to think about the choreography, my body was just moving and I was just up there having a good time and not having to think about anything. I just was dancing. Or as a creative, when you're writing, or you suddenly are struck with an idea. You mentioned inspiration before we started recording. This sense of like, here I am, and the information is just coming out of me. It feels comfortable, whether it's recording it on video or writing it down, or recording an audio on my phone or whatever. And the change in definition came when I commented that someone once said to me, there's no such thing as writer's block. And they went on to define it. And I've basically shortened that definition to, there's no such thing as writer's block. There's just self-judgment.
Yeah.
Because the number of times that I've worked with students, and this might be teenagers or even adults, when they're like, oh, I just can't think of anything to write. And I always say, that's BS. You have probably thought of 20,000 things to write in the last 30 seconds alone, because that's the way your brain works. And you have judged each one as bad and have refused to write it down because you judged it as bad. And that is why you have a block. Right. If you literally just said, if I have to write crap today, I have to write crap, and that is what it is, and you wrote it without judgment or minimal judgment, so you at least continue to write it, then you get used to the state of just writing anyway. Right. So you don't keep information coming out, and that puts you in a flow state because you're not stopping it up with your self-judgment. So I think that that's a critical component to be aware of, is that element of self-judgment.
Yeah, cool. It's just listening to, two books, and these guys work together, which is Stephen Kotler, He wrote The Rise and Fall of Superman, and then Jamie Will, who Stealing Fire, and they're both created this thing called the Flow Genome Project. They're Silicon Valley local, and they work with high performance athletes, but they also segue into inventors and innovators and just thinkers, right?
Right.
And one thing I thought was really interesting is one of the first parts, they kind of divided the flow state process into um, four stages. And the first stage, which was such a relief for me to hear, is struggle.
Mm.
So it's the first thing that comes in is the feeling of struggle, and that's, I'm feeling that a little bit right now. And it's kind of like, you're like too much in your prefrontal cortex, thinking, analyzing, judging, like listening, in a way that's, again, the critical way. And then once, it's weird because, what I like, I'm not a scientist, so it's a little harder for me to understand, but they're saying that there's different ways that the brain starts processing information when you go through the struggle period, which they say it's like a beta neurological beta wave state, which is sort of this agitated, that's the state that our brain is in most of the time when we're in conscious thinking and analyzing and logic and such. And then when we go through the struggle phase and we push through, we get into this alpha theta phase. And theta is the brain wave that happens when we're in meditation. And then alpha is like this high processing, quick processing. So that combination. And one thing they said about it is what it does is it shuts down it has a hypofrontality, transient hypofrontality is what they call it. And so basically all the analysis, the judgment, and all that starts to shut down. And so we can access different parts of our brain to get into that. And that's what they describe as, what's a very small snippet of what they describe as flow state. So, I find that really interesting. And the other thing too is that they said that conscious processing, we can only, and you would know more about this, your mind can only process 120 bits of information. So, and they say one person talking is already 60 bits. So you have two people talking, and that's 120 bits, and your conscious processing ability is like done. But the good thing is that the subconscious processing, which is what you access when you're in the flow state, is, and that's what you describe with your dancing, is sort of this subconscious thing takes over. It has an infinite capacity for processing. So that kind of segues into what one of the topics I wanted to talk to you about. And, I find that, for myself, and I find it interesting that, most people are trying all day, every day, to alter their state of consciousness. They're using all different forms of external things, internal things as well, to alter consciousness, to shut down that analytical mind, to shut down the relationship to self. So, what are people like? Coffee is something that people use. I use it too. There's all different, things that people use to alter their consciousness during the day. It's a big business. I was wondering if you could tell me a couple of things that you're interested in, or ways that you effectuate, like getting into a flow state. What's your process?
Yeah, and it's funny because it really changes by day, and it changes by period of my life, where it's sometimes a return to things I used to do frequently and stop doing, or I develop new kind of practices. But the long short for me, what is the two most effective things for me that I can think of off the top of my head? There's probably more than two, but the two that I find to be most effective are writing, if I'm trying to process thoughts and I'm having difficulty processing my thoughts.
Okay.
And the other one is breathing. I think that the longer someone has had a breath practice, the less effort it takes to return to one's breath. And people seem to think that returning to your breath sounds hokey or very kind of esoteric, but it is a very literal process of becoming aware of your own physiology, cueing into it and literally shifting from sympathetic, which is reactive nervous system, to parasympathetic, which is at rest recovery.
Oh my God, that is so good. That is so good. Tell me more about how you use your breath, what kind of breath work you do and when you use it.
Yeah. So over time, I've done a few different breathing techniques, some that were guided meditation techniques. I do have some experience with pranayama and Kriya yoga and Ujjayi. I don't know that I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that's how it was. That's how I remember Ujjayi breathing.
Yep.
It's kind of ragged breath where you're pushing against part of your throat to make yourself more conscious and aware of your breathing. I'm sure it has other physiological effects too, but that's what I associate it with. And the other technique is, I don't remember its name right now, but it's essentially where you practice making your breaths as long as possible, so that you might be inhaling for as long as 30 seconds. For an example, I think my record, not that it's a competition, right? But just for my own awareness, for my own awareness of my own development, I think my most comfortable and longest time, not my longest time where I was physically uncomfortable, but my longest time where I was comfortable, is around 30 seconds, 31 seconds of inhalation. And I don't remember how long the exhalation was, because my exhalation is consistently longer than my inhalation. And I don't know if it was a full minute. But it changes how our relationship with our breath so drastically, especially if someone is accustomed to breathing in a very shallow manner, which is very common under states of stress, because we're meant to be quickly getting air in and quickly, oxygen in and carbon dioxide out, but that's supposed to be for a very short period of time to meet an immediate physical threat or emotional threat. So when we practice really slow inhales and really slow exhales, we're telling our body, like, everything is groovy. You can slow down now. And it changes your capacity for breath. And it changes the oxygenation in your system.
Oh my God.
And then suddenly you go from like wired, go, 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 to just, I am just coasting right now. I can just be on this cloud, this wave, this, choose your image, your metaphor. And that, to me, hands down, I call it my 30-second meditation. And sometimes it's a minute and a half meditation if it's a single really long breath, where I've practiced for so many years. And even, I don't want to say so many years like this is inaccessible to you unless you practice for years. If you really dedicate yourself to just practicing the slow breathing, once you hit a certain point, your meditation is as long as a single long breath, a single inhalation, a single exhalation, completely transform your physiology. It's a cue that your body and your brain just go, does it work every time? No. you might have to do it for 10, 15 minutes straight. But you're building yourself to the point where it's more likely than a single breath you will alter your state.
Dude, I love that so much. And I'm glad, because you reminded me that it's so funny how quickly you forget. And one of the, techniques that I, when I work with people, talk about is having that awareness of the breath and then using the breath work, right? So for me, I notice I almost virtually hold my breath when I'm stressed out. Like this breathing is very tiny, very shallow, and it's almost like I'm not even breathing at all. And then if I have an awareness of that I'm feeling this sensation in my body where I'm feeling like, whoa, I'm feeling really anxious. And then I'm like, oh, look, you're barely breathing. And then I start to take those long, deep, conscious breaths like you're talking about. And then, and I do like the techniques. There's all different, enumerated techniques, like, inhale for 7, hold for 7, exhale for 7,
Right.
they have different numbers for doing that. And it's just,
in for 8, hold for 4, out for 8, or.
Yeah, and
different speeds of breathing, and
I've used that a lot in my yoga classes as well, and it's such a game changer. And the other thing I love too is for communication. Oftentimes, if I'm and I think this is a great hack for people. We were talking about flow states, but this is for regulating yourself. And you have to be regulated to be in a flow state, by the way. You can't be
yeah.
dysregulated to get into flow state. Okay. So if I'm having a conversation and I'm starting to feel constricted and tight and anxious, then all I have to do is remind myself, relax your body, relax your shoulders, and start doing the breath work. And it is a huge game changer for interrelational interactions, listening to someone else, and not getting reactive. So what was the other thing that you were talking about? You said breath work, and what was the first thing that
Writing.
writing? Tell me about that and how that works for you.
Well, it's interesting because I have discovered more uses for my writing and have run across more research where people have said, "Oh, have you seen this?" Or I'm like, "Oh, right, that's probably why I've been experiencing what I've been experiencing with writing," which is funny to, you don't have to know the atomic structure of gold to be a goldsmith. And it's very much the same with our thoughts. You don't actually have to understand the kind of anatomy of our thoughts to necessarily work with our thoughts and change and improve our thoughts. So this just happens to be additional information about why the thing works, not just that it works.
Okay.
And that is that when we are trying to process something, for example, when we feel threatened, and that can be any heightened emotional state, our brain has a survival instinct, tries to keep reminding us of the thing that we're protecting ourselves against. And so therefore we stay stuck in a loop where we keep talking to ourselves about this threat because we think that we're protecting ourselves when the threat is no longer present or imminent. So what we're actually doing is depleting our resources. So when you write down the thing that you're upset about, and this is fairly universal. When I say you, I mean the universal you, maybe not right away and maybe not fully where you're fully relaxed. But once you've done that, you've basically told your brain, look, I wrote it down. Look, I've made it permanent.
Yes.
It's written down here. I physically took this action. It's different than typing. I physically took this action. My eye watched my hand. Assuming you're quote fully abled. I know that's not the right term, but I'm sorry, I can't think of the term right now. You've had the physical sensation of doing the writing. Your brain has had the experience of doing the writing, and you go, "Oh, I've recorded this information. I have now proven to myself that I am aware of this threat, and now I don't have to live in this constant sympathetic, again, reactive state." So that's one way in which writing helps, is the simple unburdening of the survival instinct of the brain. Another way that it helps is capturing and or revealing thinking that you don't know you have, that the person who's writing doesn't know that they have.
Yes.
So for me, like I know you've talked before in some of your videos about the Mitote journal, the judge victim journal, and I talk about that in my own work as well. Once you start capturing your repetitive thoughts and become aware of them, then you can disrupt them. So that's kind of similar in nature to the first one. It's about heightening that awareness. And then the last one is what we started this conversation with, which is flow state. That if I'm not judging what I'm writing and I'm simply writing, whether creatively or self-reflectively, it really doesn't matter. As I'm writing, when I allow myself to continue writing without worrying about what I'm writing, the stuff that comes out of my brain, I presume this is universal, but I will at least speak for myself. The times when I was having a problem and trying to talk to myself in my head about the problem, it's like I was trying to keep track of too many sides of the conversation. But once I started writing it, it's like the page was the other part of the conversation, so it relieved me of some of the burden. I don't know if that makes sense.
Totally.
But as I'm writing it down, I was like, oh my God, and that is why I never worked it out with my ex, because I was projecting this version of her in my head and it was not conforming to the version of her in reality. And so I was constantly in conflict with myself over her, not actually with her. Oh my God. Right. And this all came out of just journaling. In this case, it was every day in the morning. at this particular period of my life. It doesn't have to be every day, but that's what I was doing at that time. And just doing a brain dump and like, how do I get all this energy out of me? How do I get these thoughts out of me? And I just started writing. I was like, the revelation.
Love that analogy too. That's so interesting. Another thing, just to tag onto your writing, for me, one of my fears are with this thing where, the brain's like, oh, you got to remember, you got to remember, you got to remember. So then you can't create because you're trying to remember these things. And so what I'll do is I'll write lists. So if I write lists, then I can be free, whether it's like, tangible things to do lists or things that I'm thinking about, writing or talking about. And if I have that, then it's like, oh God, I'm safe. It's here, and it's
I cannot tell you how many to-do lists I never completed all the tasks on, but it proved how unimportant the tasks were because even though I had a list of 25 things, I only ever got 5 done and still the world didn't stop spinning.
Yeah. But it, like you said, it's just nice to transfer that energy.
Exactly.
And also back to the, notion of flow state, it's, when you're starting to feel inspired, I read about somebody, it might have been Tom Bilyeu or somebody like that. I actually don't think it was him, but it was another thinker, author, etc., who has yellow notepads all over his house, like pens and notepads all over his house, which I love that idea because then it kind of spurs you to be like, there's something interesting I can write. And then you can connect to, having thoughts, and then you can just write them down, right? Transfer the energy onto a piece of paper about ideas that you have. And so that's like such a great hack, I think.
Oh my God. Yes. I think I've shown you the Notes app on my phone or the Google Keep app on my phone. And it's ridiculous. Like I have it right here. Not that everyone's going to see the video, but just, I know most people are going to listen just to the audio, but just for context, my Notes app is, and I'm still scrolling. I'm still scrolling. Just in case anyone was curious, I am still scrolling.
Oh my God.
So this is just
impressive.
This is me when I watch a video and I save the link, or I listen to a podcast episode and I save the link, or I am talking to my wife and she says something absolutely mind-blowingly brilliant. And I'm like, I have to talk about the fact that she said this. Or, I had an experience with my baby and I'm like, oh my God, I have to capture this. Or like whatever it happens to be, book idea, it doesn't matter.
That's impressive.
If it's popped into my head more than a few times, then I consider that staying power, like the fact that I care about it enough that it's popped into my head multiple times. And then I go, okay, if this has been popped in my head this many times, I need to not take that as, oh, that means I'll have this thought forever. I should take it as, this is important and I don't want to lose it, so I better write it down.
Yeah.
And then I write it down.
Yeah.
So it's every once in a while.
Cool. I'm glad you showed me that. Mine is more of an old school, like, you should see the piles of paper. I'm like, I'm a little frightening the amount of notes that I take with very large scribbly handwriting everywhere. It's like,
I still have notebooks from high school where I was in my psychology class and I scribbled something in the margins, or, religious studies class in college and I scribbled something in the margins. I'm like, I can't get rid of this notebook now. So I have boxes of notebooks, just, for academic notebooks that have personal thoughts in them that are just stowed away. And every once in a while, I pull one out and I flip through and I go, geez, is that, that was what I was thinking at 16. How true is that now? Have I changed my perspective, or was that actually a really great learning that I keep with me to this day? And it's just interesting to reflect on that.
That's so cool. I'm a firm believer in writing manifests. It does. It makes things manifest. And, I actually look back at decades of things that I wrote. I'm weird. I keep my to-do list and I look at, like, I got all that stuff done. It's like crazy the amount of stuff that I manifested. It's like it works, so that is an important part, I think, of creating and being able to have your mind access flow state, writing, like the breath work. What are some other techniques? Let me think. For me, I use um, working out.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was gonna say moving your body.
Yeah, it's just crazy, and for me, I feel like it's a little bit more of a chemical state for me, and I feel like it really does create a chemical state for me. And there's, like 6 primary, chemicals that, your body secretes or create. It doesn't create it, but it secretes,
Mhm.
when you're doing, you're either doing a really vigorous physical exercise, or you're doing something that's very risky. So,
Mm.
like these super athletes that are doing very risky, you know, high, what do you call those? High risk sports, right?
Yeah, extreme sports.
Extreme sports. That's the word extreme I was looking for.
Yeah.
But those chemicals, I feel those chemicals when I work out. And so I feel like for me, I'm a little bit addicted. I need it. Like I need that to, get to myself to those states. So I just like to collect ideas of things that help me to, get into flow state. And that's one that I can, it's like something that I can go to pretty
I don't
easily.
have any clinical evidence for this, so I don't know if anyone's done a study, and I'm simply not aware of it. But I do genuinely believe there's some level of not just adrenaline, like people talk about adrenaline junkies, but also endorphin. And I don't want to say addiction because that implies that there's a very extreme reaction to not having endorphins. But as someone who has watched people who are, say, dancers who get an endorphin rush while dancing and then they don't dance for 2 weeks and they're these miserable human beings and they dance once and they're like the happiest they've ever been,
Yeah.
and it's this kind of sudden, these happy hormones that kind of, it's not literally a happy hormone, but
Yes.
anyway, it contributes to satisfaction and joy, and so you kind of, as well as being analgesic, and so you just kind of painkiller. Sorry if someone doesn't know analgesic. So there's this effect that when you have endorphins regularly flowing through you, that makes you a very different person than when you're starved of having that
Yeah.
level of endorphins you're used to. And similarly with, I mean, serotonin is just everybody, right?
Yeah.
But yes, yeah, endorphins and serotonin and oxytocin, all these sorts of things are so critically important to our well-being. We forget that we are animals and that we need these chemical reactions to actually experience the joy that we want to experience, which is
Right.
why working out is so important.
Well, I mean, to me, it's important to talk about, for the listeners, because I think it's, kind of underrated where, our educational system doesn't talk about how to feel good and
Yeah.
to be able to access your creativity every single day. This is something that people should be doing every day, and there's actions that you have to take to create these abilities to have these feelings, right? For me, it's vigorous exercise, whether it's yoga, lifting weights, doing some hike in nature that's difficult. But I also feel like even having a great, recording where you're talking and you're getting into a flow state and you just get high off of that, that's another way. I recently did a video on, or recording on, finding your purpose, like discovering. I don't even think the word is discovering. I think it's more like uncovering what your purpose is, and that's a thing that I relate to. You feel this nature about it. It's natural, and you feel high. You feel bliss when you do it. This is what I believe that people should be seeking, and doing every single day to reach their highest potentiality. You know,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the role of passion is also misunderstood
Tell-
in our culture. Well, it's not to go too far afield, but we have many potential emotional states, and it's like when you're in a conversation and you're really excited about the topic and you get really fired up and you're not necessarily shouting, but you find that your volume is slightly elevated and you find that your body is slightly elevated, and there's this different experience than we're just kind of generally talking about a topic. Or even if you're being irritated about a topic, like that's one form of passion. Certainly when something rubs you the wrong way, you may have a passionate response. And not everyone in this world is going to be passionate. That just may not be their alignment. Their alignment may be much more subdued, or their expression of passion may be very concentrated interest as opposed to an emotional kind of brimming. I certainly have both of those experiences, intense focus and brimming, and it just depends. But both of them are valuable to any particular individual. And so when you have something that you can either have an intense focus about, which is one type of flow state, or have a passion about, which is a different type of emotional state, it's stimulating. And our brains and our bodies need stimulation. And when we don't have that stimulation, we languish. It's again, we are a species that requires stress. And I don't mean that in a negative way. The same way that I had a friend of mine who was into biology talking about the literal pressure within a plant that is what causes the water to be drawn up through the stem and pushed out into the leaves. We require a similar type of stress. We require pushing up against things. And when we have these different emotional states, they're stimulating, and that benefits our growth. And when we don't have these forms of stimulation, internal, external, we don't have the same type of growth. And part of human beings' need on some level, or are more or most satisfied when having some type of development. And I want to be clear, I don't mean chasing personal growth, because we could have a conversation for 2 hours, you and I probably about that alone, what it looks like to chase personal growth as opposed to experience personal growth. But to have some type of stimulation like that, I think is incredibly important for our well-being.
Yeah. I love that you said that, because when you first said the word stress, it kind of subtly triggered me. I was like, stress. But as I allowed you to keep having that thought, I started processing the notion of the word stress, and I realized that I'm programmed to think resistance when I hear that word, and negativity.
Yes.
But
isn't that fascinating?
it is fascinating. And
Yeah.
the thing is that I started realizing that all my days, would vary in levels of like pleasure or joy. And then some days would be more challenging. But I realized that it was the labeling that created the resistance, that created the unpleasant suffering that I had. If I allowed
10,000%.
if I allowed myself to have a day where I was like, wow, I'm feeling kind of sad today, and if I, instead of trying to resist that and feel like, oh, I need to feel joy and bliss and focus today, and just allow that to happen and know that that's all part of the process of, that's what the unfolding's about, and, just allowing the process, then I could actually be not only, okay with it, but just realizing it was an important part of the process. It's part of the growth process, is having those, that stress, right?
Exactly. And the irony of the really popular HIIT workout, HIIT, the high interval intensity or high intensity interval training.
That's right.
It's effectively safely mimicking a survival instinct where you're pushing your body so hard. You are putting your body under intense stress that normally you would only ever put yourself under if you were running from away from someone with a knife, or you were diving in front of a bullet, or you were doing these crazy extreme things. It's like, again, I keep going back to dance because it's easy access for me because of my own experience. That is not normal. Okay, stretching yourself until you can do the splits, trying to jump as high as you can, dancing full out for 5 minutes straight. This is not normal human behavior. This is the type of thing you do to stay alive when you're going to die, right? Like, this is not normal, okay? Extreme athletes are not normal. And I don't mean that like to bash them. I just mean for us to be cognizant that we are basically enacting a survival behavior. We are putting our body through extreme stress, and we are finding complete, utter, all-encompassing joy on the other side, or during the act of doing it. We're putting ourselves in stress in order to experience joy. I think we need to not lose sight of that.
Right. That's so true. Well, one thing I want to make a little tagline about, so that I remember for you to follow up on this, is the notion of normal. Okay. So yes. I want to talk about that, but going back to your, your thing about putting yourself in this, sort of this state of doing something stressful. I find that a lot of people that I've experienced that are very, highly creative, kind of extraordinary people, They obviously or maybe not obviously, but they seek out, as do I, this I find this liberation in putting yourself into these experiences which we would normally resist, and we label them as painful or uncomfortable. Like when you go there and then you, like I had said before, you just allow those feelings and don't judge those feelings, then there's absolute freedom there, because
Yeah.
now you've gone through that, you've experienced that, you've gone through that, and you see that you can survive that. So that's like a data point that's so strengthening and so empowering, right?
And it removes the automaticity of fear.
Yes.
It takes you to a point where if you choose to put yourself in safe, uncomfortable situations, to be clear, I mean, I guess unless you're adrenaline junkie throwing yourself off a cliff or something, but in these kind of potentially emotionally intense situations, for example, when you choose to consciously wade into it and you have the full experience of your fear and you do it anyway, you deprogram yourself from believing that fear automatically means don't do it. And the more often you put yourself in safe but emotionally risky, for example, situations, then the less and less the fear affects you, to the point where either it eliminates the fear or you can live with the fear and still do the thing that you want to do or are hoping to accomplish. And it completely changes our relationship with fear.
Right. Now, isn't that the essence of, transcendence? Isn't that the notion of, personal freedom, empowerment, strength? When
I
you
think so. I think that's why I love the phrase enlightenment and then the laundry. And I can't remember who said it, and I wish I could remember who said it. But
Mhm.
it's this idea that you have these moments, these states of being, and then the rest of life still needs to happen. And so it's not like when you learn these techniques, suddenly you're unburdened from normal human emotions. It just means that you have a different way of processing them, and therefore your experiences with them change. It doesn't mean I stop being angry. It doesn't mean I stop being happy. It doesn't mean I stop being sad or potentially depressed. It doesn't mean I stop having anxiety. It means that maybe the intensity of any of those experiences is either lower or I experience it for less time, but I still have to do the laundry. I still, right? Like, again, stress is a part of the normal human experience. I don't stop being stressed. I just maybe don't experience it so intensely if it's emotional stress, for example,
Yeah.
when I'm in a difficult situation, or I'm able to react to it differently and quote more effectively, or like enlightenment and then the laundry. Like you
Yeah.
still you still
Yeah.
have to live in this world, right?
Well, just to expand on that a tiny bit is, one thing I think about a lot is that, it expands your boundaries. It expands, like you have this box that you put yourself in. This is all I can handle. This is all I can do. This is all. And then when you have the opportunity to push past it, and now, okay, so now data point, you're out here now. Okay, data point, you're out here. So it's you're pushing past your limits, through your limitations, the story that you've told yourself before. And so I find, for me, one of the ultimate goals is to just push through all those, self-proclaimed limitations. That's what yoga does for me. I mean, when you brought up and you kind of laughed a little bit about, like doing splits and things like that, that's what it's about. It's not about the actual thing. It's about the mind being able to, um, allow yourself to have that experience. The mind allowing that the fear and the bodily sensation that's, triggering fear and pain and danger. And now you went through that, and so now you've expanded yourself more. Tell me a little bit, um, about your word normal.
Yeah. It's my brain is exploding with so many ideas because what you were saying about yoga and stretching just
Yeah.
gave me actually a whole different notion about the experience of some type of athletes, including people who do yoga and dancers. But performing arts have a whole other have many other elements of emotion to them that I think would be fun to talk about some other time, but is not really relevant to the moment. But I had this like set of brain blasts. I'm like, oh, we gotta talk about this at some point.
Yes.
But let's talk about normal first, or maybe not the other ones at all. But let's talk about normal. So, um, normal. By normal, I think we both, and we've talked about this multiple times in our own worlds. Normal doesn't exist. Normal is a fiction that we have learned that has to do with love, acceptance, and approval, and that if you can be quote normal unquote, then you can receive love, acceptance, and approval. But of course, as we know, the irony of that situation is that we're passing down the idea of normal, even though it's not actually normal or comfortable to anyone, and so therefore it is again all a fiction. It's like when I joke about treating someone respectfully. It's like, well, how do you define respect? And then you have a whole conversation with someone where they can never define respect. And I say, so what you're saying is what you want other people to do is enact behaviors that make you feel good about yourself. And that's what you're calling respect. And then watching their faces melt down and going, yeah, so that's not actually, you don't want respect. This is a whole other conversation now that we need to have.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry, that was a little tangent, but
No, that's okay.
The point is that it is all a fiction, and so normal in this case, when I was joking about it's not normal to do these things to yourself, is if we were a quote another animal organism, right? We are animals. We're just human animals. If you were to look at some other animals, they might like to exert themselves, but they're not pushing their bodies to their limits until they break for fun. Right. And so that's what I meant by it's not normal to be a dancer. It's not normal to be an extreme athlete. If you look at the population, it is a very small number of the population by percentage that chooses to be, that is an Olympic athlete or chooses to be a dancer especially at a competitive level, or, all these other things where we're literally pushing our bodies to breaking sometimes, or very close to breaking. Like we're trying to be as close to that line and still vaguely safe. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I was saying is not normal. Like most people aren't choosing to experience this horrible discomfort, right? Horrible is self as a judgment word. I think you understand where I'm going with this though. Yeah. Putting ourselves in these states of incredible physical discomfort for fun. Like that's not quote normal.
Interesting. It's so funny because that just opened a whole Pandora's box for me that last little But first off, I was thinking maybe nature is what you were thinking, like it would be, maybe it's not natural, like as related to the nature of, but then again, I feel like it's
in my nature to do these crazy things.
Yeah, that's the thing is that then I feel like that is the nature. The nature really is to push through and do these crazy things. And what's not natural is succumbing to the lower level frequency, the lower consciousness that says, don't do it. Don't do something unusual. Don't do something uncomfortable. Don't, maybe that's not natural. I don't know.
We have competing survival drives. And this is, again, what's so fascinating about being communal social animals for survival is we have competing survival instincts that one says the unusual is, by confronting the unusual or the unknown, is how we're capable of growing to meet threats and therefore survive.
Yeah.
And enact change, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other one that says, if we act on the unknown instead of the known, we are risking our place in the group, society, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And therefore, I'm threatening my survival because I'm not being, quote, normal. I'm not fitting in with the group. I'm not doing the things I'm, quote, supposed to do. And therefore, I need to tamp it down so that I could be accepted because I will die on my own, isolated from the tribe, being kicked off the island, whatever else.
Yeah.
So these are both exist in us all the time, which is why, and I know you have experienced with your own children, we've talked before about adolescence and different brain things that happen with adolescence. This is why our brains literally go through different periods as we grow. And one of those periods is to push against the norms and to seek these new things and to think in these really, quote, weird ways, weird to those of us who have, quote, normal thinking, but what there is boxed in thinking, and why some certain aged kids think they're invincible because they're needing to take risk to learn their limits in order to be more capable as adults. So adults squashing them is a whole other conversation we could have if that's not useful.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, anyway.
So the other thing too, I wanted to kind of go off on a little bit is the normal thing.
Please.
And, as related to being creative and flowing, and there's that whole competing battle there too. It's like, that I think needs to be pushed through. And, one of the things that, the inner critic judge says that shuts down creativity, that shuts down flow states, that shuts down us really being authentic, is the fear of judgment. And so in essence, the being normal is, staying safe and thinking about what other people are going to think. And so all of us, or let's not speak for all of us, but let's say I actually think this is true, that people just want to be weird. They just want to be themselves. But the other part, the part of that is like fear of rejection, fear of, loss of love, loss of community. But I think pushing through that and just saying like, I'm going to risk that. I'm going to risk and see what's there. And I think that's really important for getting in a flow state, is not wanting to be perceived as normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We worship the extraordinary,
Yes.
particularly in our culture, but I think across all human cultures, we worship the extraordinary. And the thing is, we have a limiter in our brain, again, for quote, good reason, for evolutionary reason. It says when you're extraordinary, you set yourself apart and you're less likely to be protected by the people around you, right? So we've already discussed this. But that's what's so funny about overcoming the fear and doing the thing anyway is a great example. I was watching the Fabulous Five go to Japan, right? The Queer Eye reboot on Netflix. They actually had the Fab Five go to Japan. And it's very interesting to watch the different cultural components of a common Japanese culture, and watching these Americans and Brits and Canadians interact with that while trying to help these people. And in this one particular episode, a woman who is seen as very frumpy and not taking care of herself, they kind of walk her through this like regimen of getting in touch with herself and being more expressive. And a comedian who apparently is very popular in Japan, who is a woman who is very heavy set and has very quirky style choices, the things that are not commonly accepted in Japan. She is one of the most popular comedians in Japan, in a culture that many would call repressed or stuffy. She is considered an ideal insofar as people love to watch what she does. And so for me, it was this amazing contrast as this girl was basically not taking the risk in being herself. And yet, all the people she loved are these extraordinary people that don't fit in with the rest of her culture.
Yes.
And so there's this limiter of like, well, I can't be her. So instead of being encouraged by that person and finding her own authenticity, because that person, that same person who's really popular now, was bullied savagely her entire life for her size, for her style, for her everything else. And it just so happened with the right series of events and the right amount of ambition, she ended up eventually in this position where she was accepted. But I'm sure she still has self-judgment and concerns about her weight and all these other things too. But it's so funny, again, to think like we admire that person so much, but then we're not willing to step out ourselves because we can't be that person. We need to be safe. Because that's also a survival instinct to be safe. So I'm always blown away
Right.
that we're fighting our natural instinct to stand out as well as fighting our natural instinct. But it's a fascinating competing world in our heads.
I know. But I think it's something that needs to be, you need to have awareness about it and push through. And like, I love what you said about we worship the extraordinary. That's what you said, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
You look, why do we worship celebrity? I mean, we worship it because they actually pushed through a shit ton of resistance and fear actually to achieve what they've achieved, right? Whether you're a musician or you're an actor or you're an athlete, you kind of go through you actually push through that alone also. This is not it's not, I don't know, maybe you can correct me, but I think a huge segment of that process is a segment that you go alone for a while. And I think it's sort of like in the beginning piece where you have to be willing to walk alone and, deal with all these fears of, rejection and am I talented and, all the fear stuff. And then when you push past that, then the community comes after that. I mean, maybe you can tell me your thoughts on that.
I agree. Specifically, I really appreciate what you said about the needing to handle your own fear, because if you're not willing to tackle your fear, you can't engage with the community in the first place, because there's a certain level of vulnerability required to be in that group where you're all pursuing the same goal, whatever that happens to be. So right before you show up in the yoga class, which was where the community is, you had to choose to sign up for the yoga class, actually show up, actually stay for more than one class when you were totally freaking out and thinking you were awful. And then you need to actually stay through that experience, which is an internal experience and therefore a solo experience where you're alone in a group, right? You're in a group, but you're experiencing your own internal world. And so you have to address that in order to actually engage with the group, to have them help you as you help them achieve your goals. So yeah, absolutely. I'm totally with that.
Yeah. And that gets back to the original thing that I was saying, is the piece of struggle. The first piece that comes up is the struggle. And then just once you get through the struggle, there's the land, the landscape opens up into flow. So, yeah. So, well, it's been really nice talking to you. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks again for your just ever effervescent and interesting ideas and feedback, and love talking to you. So thank you.
You're welcome. I love talking to you too. We always have great conversations that could last for a very, very long time that are very branching and very fascinating to me.
Yeah. All right, you guys, thanks for listening. This is Silicon Sanctuary Podcast. I'm Alison, Angelis, your host, and I'm speaking with Ryan Francis, Educate for Life podcast. Thanks. Ciao.